Welcome to All Angles, a college admissions podcast by Comet, a podcast that helps you crack the code to college admissions and make informed decisions about your future. With our unique approach of exploring all angles, we delve deep into the complex and multifaceted world of college. Our show features expert advice, real-world collegiate experiences, and valuable tips and strategies to help you get not only into the college of your choice, but also succeed academically, socially, and professionally. Whether you're a first-generation college student or simply looking to improve your chances of getting into your dream school, we've got you covered. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to start your college admissions process. We know that it can be confusing and there's a lot of different parts that you have to work on to get into college. So we wanted to help you figure out where you're going and what your goals are. We'd like to welcome this week's guest, Elton Lin. Elton, would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Shania. Good to be on again. And once again, my name is Elton Lin. I'm the CEO and founder of Comet, which is an all-in-one platform guide that walks students through the entire college app process, from selecting majors, finding colleges, editing essays, and then managing all the tasks needed in order to apply. So excited to be on with you. I've also been a college advising professional for the better part of 12 years. I've helped students gain admission to every top 50 university, including every Ivy League. So I've seen a lot of students and happy to share whatever I can to help students navigate the process with more clarity and confidence. So excited to be here with you, Shania.
Awesome. Yes. So I think that, even when I was applying to college, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers that are, planning to start their application process, it can be very confusing because there's a lot of different options and aspects you have to consider with regard to maybe, what you want to actually be studying. And if you want to pursue like graduate school or people that are sometimes planning like to go into pre-med or pre-law or even culinary school, like there's just a lot of planning and it can be confusing to figure out like what do I really need to know when I'm going to college. So what would you kind of advise people when it comes to figuring out like where do I want to go and what are even the goals that I have?
I think maybe the first thing that students need to really think about is, what are your goals? Like, what do you want to do? And I oftentimes feel like there's certainly some students who maybe their parents are expecting them to go to college. There's other students who feel like they're getting encouragement or maybe even pressure from other people to attend college. But whatever the case may be, I think it's important for students to really set a goal for themselves. So maybe you're setting that goal to aim for a specific career. You really want to be a psychologist or a therapist, or maybe you want to be an elementary school teacher, or maybe you want to be an engineer. So whatever that might be, to identify what that goal is, and maybe it's a specific career, maybe it's graduate school, maybe you want to go and do your PhD. I have a student this morning who said he wants to do his PhD in astronomy. That sounds like a fun endeavor. So maybe the goal is grad school, or maybe you just want to go and learn, grow, experience, and discover what that goal might be. And college could be a good way to do that as well. And maybe you just want to be better prepared to enter into the workforce 4 or 5 years from now. You want to make sure you have a good job. Whatever the goal might be, establish what those goals are and be clear on how college might help you reach those goals. So what are your goals? Write them down, share with a friend, share with your family, and set out to reach those goals via college.
Yeah, and so that's great. And let's say people have kind of figured out now, like maybe what they want to study, or at least kind of have an idea that they do want to go to college, even if it's undeclared, and are just kind of ready to experience like the different subjects. There's a lot of confusion, I feel like sometimes with the admissions process itself and just kind of figuring out all of the different deadlines. I remember when I was applying, when you're applying to a mixture, maybe like, for example, if you're based in California, you have like the in-state, like CSUs, and then you have the UCs, and then there's private colleges. It feels like different colleges have like so many different deadlines. There's, your standard application deadline, there's early decision, early action, like rolling admissions, which I didn't even know was a thing until I had a friend tell me, like, hey, like, the CSU system has rolling admissions. Like, why are you waiting to submit your application? Like, you're already like a month into it. Like, people have heard back, you haven't even turned yours in. So how would you kind of explain that to people? Like, these are all of the different dates available to you, and how to keep track of them.
Yeah, so maybe let's go over some of the basic deadlines. And it is confusing, and sometimes you really don't know when you're supposed to submit that application. So generally speaking, there's four deadline types. The first one being early decision. And early decision means that if a school has an early decision deadline, it means that if you submit an application and you're admitted, and you submit under the early decision deadline program, if you submit your application and you're admitted, then you have to go. And the term that they use in admissions is that it's a binding application. So the agreement to give you a decision early is also an agreement on your end to attend if you're admitted. And certainly, like, why would you want to do that? I mean, definitely there's students who, would love to hear early and would love to sort of get that application in and get settled with their college admissions results. But the benefit for some students is that early decision oftentimes increases your chances to a certain degree. It depends on which university, but it increases your chances of being admitted. But frankly, it only increases your chances of being admitted if you're already in the academic bracket or you're within range of being an admitted student anyways. So if you're in that bracket, then applying early decision could improve your options. Early action is similar in the deadline in that an application, it allows a student to apply to a school early, get that admissions decision sooner, but it does not have the binding commitment of early decisions. So if you are admitted to that school, you are not required to go. But at the same time, it also doesn't really improve your chances of being admitted as well. So there's early decision, early action. Generally speaking, they're around November 1st, but it depends on the university. So you should need to check which school you're applying to and double check when the early decision, early action deadline is. The third decision type is regular decision. And so for those schools who have an early decision or an early action deadline, they also accept applications on a regular decision deadline. And so it's a standard application process where students apply by a specific deadline and receive a decision in the spring. And just to be clear, it is not binding. So if they admit you, you're not required to go. But it allows students to see what maybe you're not ready to submit your application by November 1st. And then you'll get it in by most of the time around January 1st to maybe mid-February. And then you get your decision in the spring and you decide where you want to go from there. So that's the regular decision. And then rolling admissions is that there are definitely some schools that have no deadline, or maybe they have a preferred deadline, but they're accepting applications anytime during the year. And you want to make sure to check if that school you're applying to has rolling admissions. And if so, then let her rip. You can submit it, whenever you want, sort of. So, but no specific deadline for admissions.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. So, like I had mentioned with rolling admissions, I can agree that it's super important to know which college actually does follow that, because when I was applying, I kind of was sitting on my CSU application and I was like, I'm gonna, pray and just kind of like wait, because I think you're like so anxious when you're submitting and you're like, oh my gosh, like, this kind of can determine where I'm gonna go my next 4 or more years. So I was like, I'm gonna pray. And my friend was like, no, like I already got into like 3 CSUs. You really should submit yours.
No
So
need to pray, Shania. Just submit the
I was like,
app.
he was like, what are you waiting for? And I was like, oh, I haven't prayed as much as I wanted to yet. I'm just kind of waiting to do that. So yeah. And, I think I'm kind of curious, especially like with regard to early decision. I have some friends who did do that. And then I actually have a friend who ended up getting into the school where he had applied early decision, but then he felt a little bit iffy about that decision later because he kind of wanted to now find out like where else he had gotten in. So what would you advise people, like if they're considering early decision but in between, like is there a certain like factor or a checklist where you should mentally be like, okay, I'm like 10,000% sure I want to go to this school, or, I want to increase my chances of admission, so I'm going to do ED. What would you advise people?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Shania, because I definitely think you should not be going into submitting an application on early decision unless you're saying 10,000%. I I might say 8,500%, but whatever the case may be, you need to be ultra sure that's the school that you want to go to, and that also includes the financial situation you are coming in with, or you and your family are coming in with, because in many cases, you're not going to hear your financial package or your financial aid package before you hear your decision. And so the reality is that if you submit the application and like, are you ready and able to basically pay the full amount if you are admitted? I'm not saying you will. I'm not. It also depends on the school situation, like what percentage of need the school is willing to commit to covering for you. But the reality is that your financial aid package will not be clear to you prior to you getting the decision. So are you and the family ready to go into an early decision application without hearing back from the finances? So you need to really consider that. With that being said, you can also reach out to the school, get an early assessment on your financial aid package so they can give you an estimate, but it's still not a final number and you're going to need to wait. So make sure, like, is that the school you really want to go to? And are you and your family ready to go into that financial commitment without getting the financial aid package? So those are the two big things.
Yeah, definitely. And would you, advise that everyone should be kind of filling out the FAFSA and trying to figure out if there's some sort of aid they can get? I know like some people sometimes feel that it's not necessarily worth it to apply because they might not get aid, or even like the forms can be a lot to kind of keep up with. So what would you kind of advise people when it comes to like, financial aid and even just scholarships, like really figuring out the affordability of college and how they want to be able to kind of pay that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm gonna, without going into like another 30 minutes on this, I do think that everybody should fill out a FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid, which is the application that triggers government funding for higher education. And more and more states, which is including California, are requiring all high school students to fill out the FAFSA. So I know that there are some students who are thinking like might be strategic to not submit the FAFSA. But right now we're transitioning to a period of time where there's an expectation for everybody, and some states are requiring it. So it really is neither a factor plus or minus if you submit. So I would say encourage everybody to submit the FAFSA. There is upwards of almost $2 billion worth of government aid that was left unexercised or unretrieved by college students as of a couple years ago. So like there's money there, and there's a lot of students who would normally get that money. So let me encourage everybody to submit a FAFSA and make sure you can get what you should get from the government.
Definitely, yeah. And in addition to the deadlines and the financial aid, I think one other aspect that people might tend to be a little bit worried about when applying is their letter of recommendation and even like standardized testing. I know there's still a lot of confusion for people. I think like even if a school is test blind, test optional, like even when I was applying, I was wondering like if it's test optional, but I'm not submitting a score, and maybe I have a friend who's submitting like, a 1600 SAT score, like would that kind of help them or give them an edge while applying? So how do you think like people should approach the concept of like, standardized testing and even just reaching out to teachers for letters of rec and all of that?
Yeah, let's talk about letters of rec first, because I think that's perhaps a simpler one. Is that like for some of the schools that you apply to, there's going to be a requirement from each school that you submit either one or two letters of recommendation. And so you're going to want to ask your 11th grade teacher, the teachers who know you the best, who are able to write a more personal letter, to write something for you for this coming fall. So if you're listening to this and you are an 11th grade student at the end of the school year, ask your teachers before you go off to summer break. If not, ask them first thing, first day, first week of your senior year, and get right in there, ideally from core subjects, whether it be from math, science, English, foreign language, or social science. but two teachers who know you the best, who can write a more personal letter. And for standardized testing, SAT, ACT, as you all are familiar with, there's also some changes to the SAT. It's going to be going digital in 2024 and also in a shortened format, which is going to be another webinar podcast for another time. So we'll talk about that later. But if you're thinking about, there's so many schools that are test optional, maybe one way to think about it is that will your score be an asset to your application? And the way to think about that is that, which also means that you should take it, right? So you should at least take a practice test, and you can certainly download one, buy an SAT or an ACT book, take a test, see what your score is, grade it yourself, and then see whether it would actually help or hurt your application. And the way to do that is that you can certainly go on to collegedata.com. You can get a sense of what the mean average entry SAT or ACT. If you're at the average or above, then it could be an asset. If it's below the average, then you may want to consider not submitting it. I don't think that's a hard and fast rule, but I think generally speaking, that may be a beginning point guideline to work with.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's also interesting because different colleges have different score ranges. And, for example, maybe a Ivy's requirement or average score is different than maybe an in-state school. So I remember when I was applying, I had my score in hand and I'm looking up different colleges. And with some, you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna submit it. And then with others, you're like, no, I'm not turning this score in. That's clearly not gonna help me. So I think it's definitely helpful. A lot of that data is online for people to kind of evaluate whether or not they want to submit their score. And now that, it's May and a lot of people, I have a couple of friends also in high school that are continuing to hear back from colleges, because I think if you, of course, apply ED, some people start to hear back as early as December of, their senior year. But then when it comes to even wait lists, people are still getting off those wait lists in May and sometimes even over the summer. I have a friend who got off a wait list just a few weeks before the college actually started, and they kind of were confused whether or not they wanted to stick with the choice they'd already committed to, or come to this new one. So how would you kind of explain those different dates to people, and even if they're people are getting off the wait list, or maybe submitting a letter of continued interest, how can you kind of approach that? Is it worth it to be doing that, to be still working toward trying to get off a wait list? Or
Yeah, those are all good questions. Perhaps let me begin by explaining what it is first, and then so what ends up happening is that if you apply to a college, let's just say by the November 1st deadline, on the early deadline, sometimes schools will give you that decision middle of December, and they'll say, "Oh, congratulations, you've been admitted." Sometimes they'll say, "Oh, unfortunately, perhaps you should look somewhere else." But then oftentimes you get deferred. So this term deferred just means they're going to push you to the regular round, and they'll decide later. Basically, they'll just say, "We'll get back to you." And then what ends up happening is that when your application goes to the regular round, what's been happening in large measure this past couple of years is that more and more universities are using a wait list. So they've admitted a certain number of students who they anticipate are coming, but they can't figure out the exact number of students who will actually come. And sometimes they overexceed, sometimes they undershoot. Then they have to put people on a wait list. So they put you on a wait list. And it's terrible to be on a wait list because you just don't know. You're in limbo, which is and then so what ends up happening is that you have to just wait to hear back and see whether the school will give you an admission decision to come. So normally your decision, whether you're admitted, denied, or waitlisted, comes sometime between maybe early March to the end of April. And then you have May 1st to decide where you want to go. Oftentimes after May 1st, if schools haven't filled their class, they'll go to the wait list. And so that's why you have students right now, it's end of May, you may even get to June, and they're still pulling students on the wait list because they're still filling their class. So you have to decide whether you still need to make your decision on May 1st, whether you're going to go to whatever school you're going to go to.
Yeah.
But you need to make your decision on whether you're going to forego the decision you made on May 1st and then go to the new school, or stick with what you committed on May 1st. So it's really entirely up to you. And maybe that's another podcast altogether. But you want to stay on their radar, which includes writing them a letter. Say, let's just say it's Purdue University. You do want to send a polite update to Purdue University and specifically their area representative that's covering your region, and just let them know, hey, I'm still interested. Maybe not hey, but hi, Purdue admissions. I'm most certainly still interested in coming to Purdue. Just want to update you with my grades and other activities that I've been involved in, and would really love to attend Purdue. And so just staying on their radar is important. And so to make sure that if they were to reach out to you, then they'll be more confident you're going to attend.
Yeah, and just kind of like one question I'm personally curious about, especially with the letter of continued interest, is some schools do specifically tell you not to send one. And I have seen sometimes on Reddit, or I've heard friends discuss like, no, you should still send one. So I know I think like if a university is telling you like that you shouldn't, be sending one, or that they're not going to consider it, is that kind of like the hard and fast rule, and you should be like, okay, like not going to send one? Or do you think that maybe you can consider, depending on the school, or if you're really interested, still sending them a letter like, I'm still interested?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do want to say, generally speaking, if the school says we're not going to read that letter, they generally speaking are not going to read that letter. So very specifically, I would say like UC Berkeley
Mhm.
has made it very clear that they're not looking for any extra communication after the admission decision. It's like almost for sure not going to make it to the right person to read. So I think if the school explicitly says we're not going to read a continued interest letter, then I think you should probably save your breath. And then, but there's certainly other schools that have not said anything, and you should really make sure they get a letter. So
Definitely. Okay. So I think also now, like as we're kind of entering summer, and a lot of people are a lot of juniors especially are kind of gearing up for the admission season. There's obviously one important factor of applying, which is your transcript. And I think that your transcript is effectively being built from kind of the moment you step foot onto, your high school campus. So maybe you can't entirely change that now that it's like summer, and you're entering the last year. But outside of also like your transcript, or maybe to kind of like help that now, what are some things people can start to do over this summer to kind of prepare with regard to maybe like their activities?
yeah, I let's talk about the transcript for a moment, because I think that generally speaking, yeah, your grades that you've gotten through your junior year are unfortunately the grades you've got through your junior, or fortunately or unfortunately, it could certainly be fortunately.
Right.
But if you're a human being like most of us, maybe you had a bad semester or a bad quarter, and it's really, to be frank with you, totally understandable. I do want to highlight maybe specifically, if you have a D or an F in your transcript, let me encourage you to do everything in your power to replace that over the summer. So you can talk with your counselor. Let's just say it's a D in English, like grade 10 English, and you've kind of ignored it. You've kind of moved on. But if you go back, talk to your counselor, I really want to replace that D. They can talk with you about an appropriate class that you can take over the summer that can replace that first semester D. If you change it to a B, you'll see your GPA number just get all like bounce back super fast. Like if it's like a 3.3, like you change that D to a B, all of a sudden you're like a 3.55 or a 3.6, and it works miracles. And it also looks better, because if you're a college admissions officer looking back and they're gonna see the D, what did you do to rectify the situation, to correct it? And again, everybody has a bad quarter, so I would get on it. So if you have a D or an F, I would do everything in your power to fix that over the summer before you apply. And you need to finish those classes before the end of your summer, in time for the early deadline on November 1st. So that's kind of an important marker on the timeline. And I
Yeah.
forgot the other question. So give me what
I'll go ahead. So, So that's like maybe particularly if people had a D or F, and let's say people passed all of their classes or had like C's and above, but they are still looking maybe to kind of improve their GPA. Do you think that's still something like maybe they can take extra summer classes to kind of like, help their GPA, or get a couple of B's and A's to kind of show that they are like passionate about their classes and doing well? Or do you think that they should like start to focus on other aspects of the admissions process, like gearing up to write the essays and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, so I think like as far as trying to boost up your GPA, I think if you using your example of C's and stuff on your transcript, if you got some C's and stuff, C's and other things, then it does not hurt. It certainly would help if you could maybe grab another A or two to kind of throw into the mix, which what many students are doing nowadays is taking community college classes. So you need to remember what question is going through the college admission officer's mind. That question is, if this student comes to my college, will they survive? Like, will they make it all the way through 4 or even 5 years and graduate on time? And so if they see more C's, they're less confident about that. If they see more A's, they're more confident with it. And if you get A's in college level classes, which includes community college classes, then you will communicate to them that you're like give them more confidence that when you arrive, you will make it. So taking community college classes the summer before your senior year may be a good move. On top of the fact that, yes, start writing essays. It's important. And I'm sure we'll spend some time talking about essays, which we will. And but getting on to researching colleges and all that kind of stuff over the summer, get started earlier in the summer, right after 11th grade is done. That's when I would suggest getting started with that stuff.
Awesome. Yeah. And alongside with maybe kind of like refining like their academic transcript and starting to brainstorm essays, which again, we will definitely cover later and in future episodes. What about researching potential colleges? Like, I know that there's so many options out there and there's a lot of factors to consider, like, the location, whether you want to be close to home, as far away from home and your family as you can be. Like, I think different people have different, they want, maybe a certain kind of campus culture. Some places prefer like more socialization or less. So how do you think like people should approach like figuring out what are the colleges they want to apply to?
Yeah, I would harken back to what I shared maybe earlier in this conversation about goals. And so I think it's important to, let's just say you want to be an elementary school teacher, which I think is fantastic. I do actually think that that there's going to be a great need for teachers in this next generation. So let me encourage those of you who have that interest to keep going. But let's just say you want to be an elementary school teacher, going to a college that may have a dual program to help you get your teaching credential may be a good move. Or going into an education major program where you can shadow in local public schools may also be a good move. So understand what your goals are and then begin looking at each university to see what might have the resources to help you reach those goals. So really understanding your goals, looking at the academic programs, and then like campus culture and location and size and all that kind of stuff. I feel like it's hard to, like, I've never met a student that said, like, I want to be in a school that has exactly 4,500 students. I mean, so let me suggest students to go and visit some schools in your area and see whether that environment is a good fit for you. So if you're here in the Bay Area, and Shania, I think if I'm not mistaken, you're in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah.
Where did you visit? Did you visit any schools prior to deciding where you're going to go?
I think I was really I like since I was younger, like was very like confident or hopeful that I wanted to go to one of the UC campuses. So I did visit a couple of those. Also like the local ones like San Jose State or like, Cal State East Bay, just because they were like typically within driving distance. So it was easy to see those. But I think like with regard to the UC system, I did like visit a couple of the ones that I was considering or thinking I would get into. So I did do that, and I ended up like going to UC Santa Cruz because I especially like really liked the nature aspect. So I think like for example, like when you're visiting or taking that into consideration, some people really don't like the UCSC campus because they feel like it's like 4 years of science camp, which is like a totally valid, like I can understand, people are like, no, I want the city. I feel like, there's a lot of like banana slugs, like that's our mascot. And you like when you're like walking to class, you will see like deer or like turkeys like on the road. So I think it has to do a lot with what you kind of envision yourself like. Can you stay there for a few years?
Yeah, no, think. I'm kind of curious. What did you like with the turkeys? What happens? They just roam around. Do you guys do anything with those turkeys? Chase
They
them?
they have we were like last week I was walking like back from class and they had like this parent turkey and like 7 or 8 little baby turkeys like following. You just kind of like stand there and wait until they're like done crossing the road. One time like my mom was with me, she was like visiting, and we saw like 2 deer like running across the street. So it's definitely like a really nice vibe. You don't always feel like you're in college. Sometimes you feel like you're taking a hike and just stopping for math on the way and then resuming. So I think I personally enjoy it, but of course everyone will have different factors or what they're comfortable with.
Definitely. So anybody who's a fan of turkeys, UC Santa Cruz is the place to go. Actually, I love UC Santa Cruz, and I think you made a great choice. But with regards to students, I think, yeah, it's important to go visit a few schools and I would suggest visiting both public and private and get a sense of what each school has to offer and what kind of environment is really a good fit for you. Take a tour, make sure you see the department that you might be studying in, and make sure you get a sense of what kind of resources are there and whether you can imagine yourself being there. And I think it bodes well for you to be excited about going to the school that you're going to be going to and really finding your place on that campus. So let me encourage you, begin with your academic goals and then set some ideas for what kind of school you might be interested in going to, and then do some visits. Visit your local schools. You don't need to visit across the country, but just visit some schools in your area and get a sense of what size, and then begin looking at campuses that have similar size, environment, and academic programs. And then that's how you should build your list. And, just a little bit of a side plug, you can certainly do that on the Comet platform as well. And we can help you build a college list and that can kind of fit into some of those categories. But with that being said, researching some colleges and getting a sense of what is a good fit is important.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like on top of kind of researching colleges, I was curious if you had anything to offer on a lot of people, I think after researching the colleges that they're considering, like to divide it into three, which is like I think reach schools, and then there's safeties, and then I think there's like in one like kind of in between, like your target maybe. So what would you say, like kind of breaking your, okay, like here's maybe a list of like the 10 colleges I think I want to apply to. Now, how do you break that down into where you think you're kind of guaranteed versus where you're hoping to go, but maybe it seems hard because of the, competitiveness or acceptance rate? What would you kind of offer on that?
Yeah, so absolutely. With regards to constructing a college list, the three terms that a lot of people use are reach, target, and safety. I know a lot of college counselors would like to use reach, target, and likely because it's not as safe as it used to be, and that is absolutely true. So what it means is reach school, generally speaking, the way I describe it is like it's probably less than a 25% chance of being admitted. Target is around a 50% chance plus or minus, and a safety or likely is like maybe 65 to 70% and above. It's hard to find the precise percentage admit likelihood for yourself, but generally speaking, that's how you should look at it. You can look at, I feel like the national average GPA test score data for figuring out whether it's a reach, target, or safety for yourself is not accurate or not good for you. So if your high school has uses a Naviance or a Score or a Maya Learning or some kind of platform where you can see what the average entry GPA and test score is for students from your high school to a specific college, that's the best way to determine whether like what the likelihood of you attending is. And so like if it's like the average is like a 3.8, then you really should be well above, like in my opinion, I don't think there is there's no safety if the average entry is a 3.8. It's basically a reach or a target for everybody, and most likely a reach for everybody. So, but like you need to be well above the average, and I would say even in the top 70th percentile and up in order to really consider it a safety. Let me give you one tip. Don't do this like I'm gonna apply to 10 colleges, 9 are reach, one target. Okay, maybe one safety, right? And then it's kind of expected to kind of come through at the very end. Safety schools are less safe these days because oftentimes they're trying to determine whether you're coming. And if they don't think you're the type of student who's actually going to come, they may waitlist you or defer you until the end of the world time. The world's going to, come to an end, right? So you need to make sure you have plenty of safety schools. And so I would begin with a third reach schools, a third target schools, a third safety schools, and then shift one of the reach and target safety school, one of the reach or target schools to a safety. So maybe weight your safety category a little heavier. Also, what it does is that by applying to more safety schools, you will likely get more of a financial package from those safety schools, and then you can compare the financial offers that you're getting from more safety schools. So if you are in need of more funding to go to college, apply to more safety schools, then you'll have more options as well.
Yeah, definitely. I can especially agree with kind of like the whole likely school, safety school thing because I I didn't get into my safety school and I actually got into a couple of my like reaches, but I like had kind of made a joke like all throughout like high school where I was like I'm gonna go to the safety school because everybody knew like everyone gets in. And I didn't get in. And my
Oh,
friends were like, "Oh my gosh, you were able to get into some of the UCs, but not, the safety school." So I think having like a mix is really important and not being egoistic about getting into your safety is equally important now, I think, given like how competitive it's getting in some places. And I think, admissions rates are dropping in a lot of universities. So it's definitely good to have like a mix of where you're applying. Um, yeah.
I mean, what if you could do it over again, what would you do differently?
So the safety school I actually applied to was a CSU. So I don't think there was a problem with my transcript because that's the only option I think. One thing I really did appreciate though, kind of about applying to the UC system and people that are applying to privates, is I really like the option to kind of include your activities list as well as essays because I feel like that really helps for people that feel that their transcript isn't as strong, or it just kind of gives you a chance to talk about some interesting parts about yourself outside of the classes you took. Like my essays gave me a chance to talk about like having like a teaching degree in yoga, starting like a nonprofit, really liking writing. And I feel like that wasn't seen in my transcript because there was no yoga classes for me to take, no like book publishing classes to take. So that's also one thing I wanted to kind of get into and ask you about is your advice on, crafting like compelling college essays. Like what are, some tips and tricks and mistakes you see with essays maybe?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably yeah, I would also say that's another podcast that we should we should get into. But if I were to tell students right now, and this is also I'm gonna marker this as like in 2023, May of 2023, because the world is changing very quickly right now. And there are tools like ChatGPT and Bard that are out there that students are using. I do want to say that using tools like that may help you generate an early draft just to kind of get you going. And sometimes like what's really hard for students is just writing those first words down. And so I think for a lot of students who really feel not confident and really about their writing, like using a ChatGPT type tool to kind of get started is not a bad thing. So, and I feel like that could be another conversation with people who don't agree with that, but it's not a bad thing. But the reality is that most generative AI platforms currently are generating out a very sort of medium type response. And so in most cases, that essay is not really going to be good enough for it to be submitted. So you're really going to need to come in and like really think about your story and think about what you want to communicate and really communicate like areas of growth and maturity and give them a picture of what is important to you and what type of student you might be on campus and really be honest with your story and tell a story that's true to you. Begin there and then begin and then to do your research on really how to craft a good essay. So begin with your story, begin with where you've grown, what you've learned, and what type of person are you going to be, and then we can get into some of the details of writing essays
Yes,
sometime soon.
definitely, yes. We'll probably have to do quite a few talks on that, just because I think like the essays is definitely like it can be hard to approach it in general, coming up with the ideas for it and then really figuring out how to write it, especially I think was probably the part of the application process where I took the longest. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think that's definitely very interesting to hear. And I think just kind of to wrap it up for today, I would love to hear just some general tips for success you have that students can kind of keep in mind while approaching the college application process and getting started in the coming weeks. What are, maybe some like habits or some, things to keep in mind that people can do?
Yeah, let me encourage students to begin thinking about the entire process as early as possible. And so even if you're in your junior year or maybe at your end of your 10th grade, start like asking yourself the question like what do you want to study? Like what do you want to major in and what type of career might be a good fit for you? I know there's a lot of students who are just gonna keep putting it off until you can't put it off any longer. So let me encourage you to start preparing early, talk over with your parents about finances, or talk over with your college counselor about financial resources that are needed in order for you to prepare yourself to get to college. Be organized, use a spreadsheet, whatever you use, whether it's a notepad or a spreadsheet or whatever, Google reminders, whatever it is you need to do, make sure you start early and manage your time well. Like ask other, we haven't talked at all about majors and or at least maybe I haven't talked that much about majors. But if you're not entirely sure, ask people you trust. Ask your family members, ask your teachers, ask some adult mentors who've seen you and have interacted with you, what might be a good major fit or and future career fit that might be good for you, and get input from people who love you, who have really witnessed you and can make a good suggestion for you. So definitely start early, remain as organized as you can, and reach out to people who care about you to ask them for input on from potential college majors and maybe even some colleges they might think you'd be a good fit for.
Yeah, definitely. I think like you mentioned, and in addition to that, just kind of being organized and having good time management. I actually wrote about time management as like my skill in my UC essay because it asks you like what is one of the skills you want to that you think you're strong in. And I actually talked about time management. So I think that having that and just kind of persevering when it gets confusing or there's a lot of different like aspects to kind of cover when you're applying. So keeping that all in mind. Yeah, I love that. And I hope that the viewers that are listening out there find those tips kind of helpful as they're also approaching their admissions journeys. So that concludes this episode of our Comet podcast. We hope you enjoyed listening and gained valuable insights from our discussion. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment on this week's episode and share it with your friends and family. If there's any specific topics you guys want to hear about or people that you want to see featured on our podcast outside of me and Elton, feel free to let us know in the comment section below. You can also go to www.applywithcomet.com/podcast and to let us know there. Our contact information will also be in the description. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Comet Podcast.